Okay, so as promised, this is the enhanced version of a summary of the quote-unquote Tomlinson method, and it is going to have some quotes for lawyers that went on record with their commentary about it. So I'd like to start off by saying a quote: "Be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think of you," by John Wooden. And another variation of this is that your reputation is what you do when people can see you, and your character is what you do when no one sees you and when it's not necessarily going to directly be an advantage to you or a benefit to you. So we all know the story of One Direction by now, but this is a story about Louis and how Louis Tomlinson, a young man who was 18 at the time when the band was formed, whose character would prove vastly different from his public reputation, orchestrated one of the most significant contract renegotiations in modern music history. What industry insiders now refer to as the Tomlinson Method, while the media portrayed him as merely the prankster of the group. Early One Direction X Factor Diary footage shows a very sassy Louis, which is a lot of the fans talk about sassy young Louis. So basically the prankster was kind of how they presented him, but behind closed doors, he was developing the business acumen and strategic mindset that ultimately would secure the band's freedom. So to understand the significance of what Tomlinson accomplished, we need to understand what they were up against. The 2010 Syco contract was, even by music industry standards, was restrictive even for its time. And music industry contracts often include the golden handcuffs, that the terms look really beneficial, but they severely limit the artist's creative and financial freedom. And according to industry reports and later interviews, the original One Direction contract, after they were put together on X Factor, included the 5-album commitment, options to extend, royalty rates that significantly were below industry standard for their level of success, very broad merchandise and image rights control, restrictive creative input clauses, and touring revenue arrangements that heavily favored the label. Okay, so here's a quote from Brian Caplan, a music attorney, and it's Caplan, Caplan. With these talent show contracts, especially from that era, the labels would front load their investment but secure a much greater percentage of revenue streams than what we'd see in a traditional arrangement. The artists have very little leverage at that point of signing. It's not that these deals are illegal, they are just extremely favorable to the labels. So, point note, Brian Caplan, Brian with the I, Caplan with the C as in cat, is a prominent entertainment attorney who represented the band The Turtles in landmark digital royalty cases and has commented extensively on recording contracts for publications like Billboard and The Hollywood Reporter. Okay, so by 2014, we all know that the One Direction band was a global phenomenon, and that's when the third album, Midnight Memories, was released, fastest selling album in the UK that year, and it topped the charts in 26 countries. So they were generating hundreds of millions in revenue, but then questions began to surface about how much of that money was reaching the band. So what I've kind of mentioned it in a couple other videos about the keen business interest that Louis took in the business of music. So Julian Davis, who's a music industry executive, here's a quote from him: "Many artists, especially those who achieve fame at a young age, tend to focus solely on the creative side. What set Tomlinson apart was his determination to understand the business frameworks that controlled their careers. He was constantly asking about publishing percentages, royalty statements, and touring company structures. And this level of curiosity about the business side is rare, particularly for artists who come up through the talent show pipeline. So Julian Davis has worked with numerous major labels, including Sony Music, and has spoken on record about artist development for Music Business Worldwide and Variety. So March 2015, almost 10 years ago now, Zayn had left the group, which catalyzed Louis' determination to gain more control over the group's future, because it provided an opening when Zayn kind of left, because that was a changing in the composition of the group in a contract that can trigger renegotiations of the initial terms of the contract. So Louis began consulting with independent music attorneys, but not those that represented the label or their management, because that would be a conflict of interest. And between tour dates, he apparently reportedly educated himself on contract law fundamentals. And so by the 2015 also, that was the album 3 of the 5 contract album obligation. And the commercial success that they were experiencing by the time 4 came out, apparently insiders said that you could tell by the content of the discography that it was showing signs of the creative restrictions they were under. And so, Louis had recognized the immense commercial value that gave them leverage, was because they were profitable. So according to industry sources, he began building a case on several key factors. First was the songwriting, and that began with album 3, and they increasingly, not just him, but like Louis and Liam, Zayn, Niall, Harry, began increasingly contributing, writing their own material. And then by the 4th album, 4, they had co-writing credits on a majority of their tracks, and this strengthened their position in the bargaining table, because it demonstrated artistic growth. And then they were no longer a manufactured band at that time, and there are separate income streams that come through publishing rights because you wrote it. Okay. Then the second part of that was also Tomlinson identified that the international touring and markets where their contractual obligations had different structures, so depending where they were. So according to the business analysts, this created opportunities to demonstrate their independent commercial viability. And Louis knew timing, because reports indicate that Tomlinson identified a period of executive transition at Sony Music, which is the parent company for Syco, and that created a window where disruption would be particularly unwelcome to the corporate structure, because there's a changing of who's in charge, changing of management. And then finally, and apparently this was the most important precedent that was set in this whole battle for freedom, Tomlinson studied the cases of other artists who had successfully negotiated with or departed from Syco, learning from both their successes and failures, because you want to see somebody who's done it successfully, and how can you leverage what they did and learn from their strategies. And also a lot of cases, unless a law case is sealed, you could technically go on and look it up. In the United States, any federal case that was not sealed, if you went on Pacer, you could search by the party, and you could search by if you knew the case number, you could probably find it. But you'd have to create an account on Pacer, and then if you were to download documents in that quote unquote docket, which is the case file, there's a charge. Now in the U.S. state cases, not so much. You'd have to have I think it's LexisNexis, but unless a case is sealed, technically speaking, if it's been settled, you can go and look it up. That's what lawyers have an account with LexisNexis, and they look up cases that are at the state level. So, all right, so apparently the actual negotiation process began in late 2015, according to multiple sources. What made the Tomlinson Method distinctive was its approach. It did not take an adversarial position. Apparently, Louis reportedly advocated for a strategy that presented the renegotiation as mutually beneficial. Like I said, if you're going to negotiate, if you're going to have any talks with a narcissist or a bunch of them, present information framed in what's in it for you more than what's in it for me, and then you want them to come to their own conclusion that, oh, this is the strategy we take, this is the angle we go. Basically, you want them to think it's their idea. I don't know if that's actually happened, but I've heard that before. So I can see if you were negotiating with a bunch of like narcissists, that making it a win-win would be less of a power struggle that would happen. And the industry analysts suggest that the core of the strategy involved demonstrating how a restructured deal could ultimately generate more revenue for all parties by energizing the band creatively and extending their career. Okay, so and again, the key to timing. So I was thinking this, that, because Louis played sports and it was a team sport, and you have to have strategy to be good at playing team sports, so you're exposed to strategy, game strategy. Definitely was paying attention, and he's also, I think, just naturally brilliant. So yes, the key approach was timing, because sources indicate that Louis waited until they'd fulfilled more than half their contractual obligations, that they had proven their songwriting abilities, they had established independent business relationships outside the Syco system, and that the band demonstrated that they were all in it together. All right, so here are a couple of some quotes. Another one was from Lisa Alter, entertainment attorney. What stands out about certain high-profile band renegotiations isn't that they occurred, because renegotiations happen frequently in this business, but the methodology. So when you see a major act transition to more favorable terms without the typical public fallout or legal battles that often characterize these situations, that signals exceptional strategic planning. That kind of invisible contract restructuring requires sophisticated coordination and a deep understanding of where leverage truly exists. So mastermind Louis. All right, and Lisa Alter is a founding partner at Alter, Kendrick & Barron, who specializes in music publishing rights and has represented major songwriters and estates in catalog acquisitions. She has been quoted extensively in Forbes, Billboard, and the New York Times on music contract matters. So another element of leverage was the implicit threat of individual success. By 2015, industry insiders were already aware of the interest in the individual member's solo potential. I mean, they all auditioned to solo acts, so there's only a certain shelf life of a boy band. So they probably all want to go solo because extending your career, unless they've indicated they want to retire, but they weren't. So Tomlinson reportedly ensured this potential was subtly incorporated into negotiations, not as a threat, but as a business reality that needed addressing. Yeah, because you can go solo and come back. It's like, who does that? Duran Duran did that. The Stones have done that. There's been many groups where they kind of they have a little hiatus. They go do their individual stuff and then they come back, which was what I think a lot of fans were kind of hoping for that one. So remember, the negotiations are never publicly announced because it was not done like in a litigation in a court. So there would be no like docket numbers to look up. But I think what Louis did was that the other cases where it did end up being in court, where it had to be litigated, that was on record. Like the George Michael was with Sony, not with Syco, but there were, if you look at like what George Michael has gone through and what other musical acts have gone through with getting out of a music contract that had to have the court involvement, it's intense. So basically, because it was done not in a courtroom, it was just done at the bargaining table. Insiders kind of say that that's a testament to some professionalism that in the manner in which it was conducted. But there were some key changes that people had pointed out that were analyzing the music biz. Fifth album, The Made in the AM, the discography, it had demonstrated the significant increased creative control in writing credits, and the production and marketing strategies also demonstrated a level of artistic input that was different from earlier releases. So when they announced the hiatus in 2016, that was part of what was considered carefully structured language about future possibilities, and industry analysts note that this gave the individual members significantly more flexibility than the original contract would have permitted. And one thing that was also pointed out in the research is that what was really a standout was how each member's subsequent solo projects were announced, with the deal structures that in contrast reflected more favorable terms to them as solo artists than what their original group contract presented to them as a group. And the industry sources have said that would have been impossible without a fundamental restructuring of the original terms, original agreements. All right, so Donald Passman, who's a music industry attorney and author, was quoted as saying, "When you observe members of a group formed under a talent competition, subsequently securing solo deals with significantly improved terms, especially those regarding creative control, ownership stakes, and royalty structures, it strongly indicates successful prior renegotiation. The leverage dynamic completely shifts once artists prove that they have individual commercial viability. But that transition rarely happens seamlessly without groundwork being laid while still under the group contract." And then Donald Passman is the author of the book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business, and has represented major artists including Taylor Swift and Adele. His analysis of contract structures has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and Entertainment Law Review. And we all know some of the legal battles that Taylor Swift has had in terms of owning her own material. So this lawyer, Passman, has represented her. And, while Louis has himself only spoken very sparingly, apparently, about the business aspects of One Direction, over time, comments about that from him apparently is regarded by the industry as revealing a very sophisticated understanding of music industry contracts. And he's put those skills to task in his own record label initiatives and founding his own festival, because remember, Louis began with the opposite of Harry in his solo career, like not a lot of support. In fact, kind of industry backlash to him and Liam Payne for them putting themselves on the line for Niall and Zayn, and in many instances of at great risk to them. So that acumen paid off well because he had to do it himself. All right, so apparently it is known, this whole renegotiation, this liberation from Syco, apparently it's known as the Tomlinson Method. So it's, I'm going to do some more research on this because I want to just verify that this has been studied in law journals, or this has been presented in law symposiums. I really want to, I'm going to look that up. So it's kind of a template for artist empowerment, balances leverage with cooperation by focusing on mutual benefit rather than confrontation, which, I think Louis, being the oldest of 7, he probably had to do this when he was growing up, being kind of like a third parent and helping mom and dad and, these siblings, being the oldest. It's like, Alfred Adler has said that there's your birth order can influence your personality development, and they talk about the oldest, the only, the middle, the youngest. So not in every case does this sort of happen, but I think in this case I could see how somebody who really believes in Adler's theory, that Louis is kind of an example of the Adler's theory about the oldest and personality development in action. So let's see. So basically, many industry veterans had considered what Tomlinson did kind of impossible because they restructured a really restrictive contract while maintaining their commercial momentum and preserving relationships that benefit some more than others. So the legacy of this approach extends beyond One Direction. And a couple other quotes. So Dina LaPolt, Lapolt, who's an entertainment attorney, had been quoted as saying, "We're seeing a significant shift in how younger artists approach their contracts today, particularly those who've studied the playbook of bands like One Direction. Instead of the nuclear option of lawsuits, public battles, claims of artistic differences, there's a more sophisticated understanding that mutual benefit preserves value for everyone. The most successful negotiations happen when artists demonstrate how their increased autonomy can actually enhance the label's ROI. That's the real innovation in these modern strategies." And so Dina LaPolt, prominent music attorney who's represented Steven Tyler and Dead Ma 5 and testified before Congress on music industry reform, frequent contributor to Billboard's legal analysis, and has spoken extensively about artist contract rights. So that is the quotes of the Tomlinson Method, or commentary on the Tomlinson Method, that are based on attributed comments from people that are actual attorneys. So anyways, I hope to find more, really, but yeah, I can definitely see why he has helped many people in future generations, not just One Direction.